Good evening. Good evening. Welcome to the Monday, November 10th meeting of the Falls Church City Council. Thank you all for attending. I'd like to call the meeting to order. If you could all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call, please?
Mr. Baruch, am I on?
He's absent on travel.
Okay. Ms. Conley,
Here.
Mr. Duncan,
Here.
Ms. Oliver,
Here.
Mr. Snyder,
Here.
Mr. Z,
Sure.
Mayor Tarter.
Here.
Testing,
Again.
1, 2, 3.
Good evening. Let's see, we have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I would move, except I'm not sure my microphone is working. Sure,
Yeah, I
yours
don't
working?
think mine is either.
Can you all hear us down there?
It's not on. They're not on.
Doesn't sound like the mics are on.
No.
All right, we will work on that, but I think we'll keep on going in the meantime.
Well, all right.
It's
We
on,
do?
Yeah, but the sound isn't picking up.
Not working either, right?
Please record for the TV, which is the main purpose for the microphone.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, let's go ahead and proceed then. Hopefully, the public can hear what we're having to say here. Do we have a motion to adopt the meeting agenda?
I move to adopt the meeting agenda.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. Are there any proclamations tonight, Madam Clerk?
No, sir.
Okay. Any oaths of office to new boards and commission members?
No, sir.
Okay. We'll go ahead and open it up to public comment now. Is there anyone in the public who would like to address City Council? Okay, Ms. Cramp, please. Barb?
Good evening. My name's Barbara Cram, and I live at 212 East Jefferson Street. And tonight I'd like to talk about our refugee blanket drive that I was asked to help with in the City of Falls Church, help to coordinate. And of course, when we're here in the City of Falls Church, one great way to coordinate things is to work with the schools. And that's where a lot of our families are. And we've been collecting blankets at the community center, and we've collected about 50 blankets there so far, and they're all in my kitchen and going to the back right now. But we've been luckily have obtained a house thanks to the efforts of Danny Schlitt. That's on Park Avenue. We'll be collecting the boxes, the box blankets, so the Paxton van lines can come up and get those all at one time, so we're not driving all over the city. I'm thrilled to be able to work with these young people that came tonight. I had made presentations at the high school and at Mary Ellen Henderson and taken boxes over to Mount Daniel and TJ, and thanks to Mary Beth Conley, who helped me connect with all the right people there, and Farrell Kelly at MEH, and also Suzanne Planis, who is at George Mason. And they've been very instrumental in having the message go out, and these young people here have devoted some time and energy to make this all happen. So I'd like to have them tell you what's going on at their different programs at their schools that they're in charge of. The first one up is Orion Date, and he chose this his CAS project, and he's working with Ms. Planis on that project, and he's coordinating at the high school.
Welcome.
Okay. Hi, Orion Date. I'm a high school senior. Hello. And working with Senora Planis, as I know her, or Suzanne Planis. I've been working with also Sarah and Tasha at my school. We're currently getting 4 boxes actually in the main lobby. I've just gotten permission to do that. And we have them decorated with the 4 classes. We're gonna have a bit of a competition, which should hopefully gain a bit more interest. You never know, it usually does. But seniors will always win because we're seniors. So yeah, thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much for your work.
Now from MEH, Farrell Kelly, who's their sponsor at the school. Benjamin is going to come up, Benjamin Smoke, and Ciara Curtin, Vice President. And Matthew, I'm sorry, Ciara. Kira. I never do that, I'm sorry, I did it right. And Matthew Schaefer. Okay.
Welcome.
Hello, I'm Benjamin Smoke, and I'm the president of MEHMS. This is Kira Curtin, vice president, and Matthew Schaefer, secretary of MEH SCA. And we have put up bins to collect blankets in every grade hall, as well as in the office.
We also have made flyers and posters to put around the school to spread the word about bringing blankets so we can help those in Syria during this cold winter.
And for advertisement, we've put throughout the school, like in the morning announcements, we have something that tells them where to put the blankets and more about the blankets, where to put them.
That's fantastic. You guys are doing a great job. Why don't you come on up and we can shake your hands, maybe get your picture taken. Would you guys like that? I think my daughter's on SCA with you all, my daughter Anna.
Matthew's working the room.
I need you to email it to me.
Okay, fantastic. Look forward to seeing all those blankets roll in. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to address City Council at this time?
Mr. Mayor, before we leave this topic, I think it's appropriate to especially thank Barbara and the other coordinators and parents who have supported their students' efforts in this regard.
Absolutely, absolutely. Fantastic work all the way around. Okay, Madam Clerk, are there any written comments? Would you like to read to us?
We have one written comment from Jeffrey Heil of 307 Grove Avenue, and he wrote to the council to ask how spending on West End Park can be justified over all of the other needs of the city. And you did get an email attached to in your packet.
Thank you. Are there any council requests? Any council requests? Okay, why don't we move on to the report of the city manager, Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. I'd like to report again this week. 2 weeks ago, I did report out publicly on the Mason Road project and the fact that the developer has asked for additional time before they come back to council. We've received a formal letter from the developer asking that the December 8th meeting, which is when the council was scheduled to take action on the application, be deferred, as well as the Planning Commission's hearing that was scheduled for November 17th. And so we will get word out to the public as to when those meetings will be scheduled or in updates on the application. But right now, the public should expect that there will not be action on that application on December 8th, which was the original plan. We are planning to meet with the Mason Road developer this week, just with staff and the developer, and from that meeting, we'll get information out to the council and to the public as to where the project is going from here. Also, with respect to that meeting date of December 8th, we have in progress a meeting with the Arlington County Board to build regional relations. This is one of the mayor's initiatives to do that outreach and build those relationships. And so our December 8th meeting is planned to be not here at council chambers, but at the Arlington County Courthouse where the county board meets. And we'll get more information out to the public about that meeting and also work with the council on the agenda items for that meeting over the coming weeks. Tomorrow is Veterans Day. City offices will be closed, and we will conduct a public observance of Veterans Day and a celebration of the service, dedication, and sacrifice of our veterans at 11 a.m. at the Falls Church Veterans Memorial. And this is the 20th anniversary of the dedication of the Falls Church Memorial for our veterans. And so we will celebrate that as well. And Mayor O'Connor, who was mayor at the time that the Veterans Memorial was first dedicated, will be the keynote speaker tomorrow. And our current mayor will also make welcoming remarks. We'll speak more about this later in the agenda, but I did want to just note that a couple big things happened with respect to Mount Daniel Elementary School's expansion, of course, over the last week. The voters did go to the polls, approved the issuance of bonds for the projects, and we also received our ratings from the rating agencies. And I'm very pleased to be able to announce that Fitch has affirmed its AAA rating for the city. S&P also has affirmed its AAA rating. And Moody's has affirmed its AA1, which is one notch below AAA, with a positive outlook for the city. And I'll ask Mr. LeCondre to speak a little bit more about that when we discuss in a work session type of format, because there's no action on it tonight, but the bond resolution for the Mount Daniel project, the stormwater project, and the sanitary sewer project. And that's all I wanted to report tonight.
Thank you. Are there any questions?
Lest I forget, thank you. Lest I forget later on, did we set a date yet for the city council and school board to get together to do the budget guidance?
We're working on a date of December 2nd, and Sandy sent that email out on Friday, and I don't know if people have responded directly to Sandy, but I have not gotten any of the responses. And so I don't know whether, really, okay. I thought an email went out on Friday requesting that date. So that would be Tuesday,
I got an email on
December
Friday, but I
2nd.
didn't respond.
So one of the issues is our regular work session is that Monday, December 1st, and so we want to see if perhaps we just cancel that work session and just have that one meeting on Tuesday night, but there were a couple of substantive items that we were planning to work with the council on at work session, so we just have to work through that potential agenda change. But I think the goal would be one meeting that week as opposed to two.
Are there any other comments or questions from Mr. Shields? Ms. Conley?
So if December 2nd, we meet with the school board, and December 8th, we're at Arlington County Courthouse. Is that it for the month of December for the city council?
That would be it. Yes.
We adjourn for the holidays.
Right.
What's that?
Well, the meeting with the Arlington board is an official meeting.
Yeah. Budget guidance.
Any other comments, questions? Mr. Snyder?
Quick question on the Mason Row project. Two, actually, having met with the neighborhood, and I think other council members may have as well, a couple things came up. One is a desire for some sort of parking permits on Park Avenue, and that should move forward for consideration, perhaps in the context of the larger city, but that's a particular issue even right now for that neighborhood. So, and one would imagine that if there is a Mason Row development, that it would have even a greater impact on that neighborhood. So I promise to bring that to the attention of the city manager. And then there was a comment that that the developer had originally come in with an all-commercial project, and that city staff or city council had suggested there should be residential units in it, and that didn't seem like anything that I wanted to have that seemed true. So I just wanted to let you know, Mr. Shields, that that comment is out there and circulating. Thank you.
Yeah, I can speak to both. One, with respect to parking, we are working on a recommendation to the city council on the parking. And one thing that is relevant, I think, on East Jefferson, right next to the North Gate, East Jefferson happens to be one of our grandfathered streets where we issue a placard. But the neighbors had the same concern, and we've been reaching out to the neighbors for those who don't have their placard or are not displaying it to do so, and then that would essentially just keep the existing regulations, but now they'll have a slightly different purpose than when they were originally designated for that street. Originally, they were to deal with commuter parking, but they will also now be used to prevent overflow or spillover parking from the new project next door to them. But we will work with, we have a proposal, and we'll bring that to council, and we know that that's very much on the immediate neighborhood's mind. With respect to the comment about the commercial, it is true that they first came in with a hotel and a retail project, and we were at the staff level, very supportive of that project as it was configured. And the developer then, I think, due to land acquisition costs, came in with a more dense project later on. And so that's very briefly the history of that.
Thanks much for that clarification. It seemed to me important enough to make that clear to the community. Thank you.
Ms. Oliver?
If I could just add on to the comment about the residential parking permits, I'm aware of a large number of citizens within Winter Hill that are pursuing putting an application in to the CACT through the Neighborhood Traffic Calming Program that have a similar request or interest in residential parking permits. So I think that as new developments are coming along or construction parking is affecting the neighborhood, that this will become of greater interest.
And one thing I will just say very briefly, because this is not on the agenda, but the city's existing policy does stand for the proposition that residential neighborhoods immediately next to commercial, we generally go with the decal, and 2-hour parking is what's called for by city code. And that was designed initially to be business friendly so that customers could park then and for a short period of time. And so it's a fairly substantial policy change. And I think there may be good reasons for it. There are a lot of neighborhood concerns out there, but when we do bring this forward, we'll need to have that larger citywide discussion, and that's the rationale for the existing policy, which we will consider then changing.
I think the bottom line, though, is that we would probably like to see something sooner as opposed to later so that we can start chewing on it and letting the community know and have them have an opportunity to comment on it. But we understand there's some challenges with it, and we know you have been working on it. But I think it's time, if we can, to bring something to council in the near future so that we'll have that in consideration when we're talking about the Mason Road project, so we can make good decisions for everyone.
Right.
Okay. Unless there are any other, Mr. Z?
I just have a quick one. Do you have an update on the status of the deputy city manager?
I do. Cindy is doing well, and she will be out this week, although she is working from home part-time. If you send her an email, you'll see that you get a response back as fast as you always had. But she is recovering very well, and I believe that next week, we're taking it sort of day by day with her, but she will likely be back in the office, not this week, but next week. And she very much appreciated the card and the outreach from the city council as well.
Okay. Why don't we go on to the first item, Madam Clerk?
We have TO 1431, ordinance to amend Chapter 26, Motor Vehicles and Traffic to prohibit the parking of trailers and recreational vehicles on public streets.
And Chief Gavin will speak to this item. I'll just say very briefly that we had an issue come up over the summer where we had some complaints about trailers parking on residential streets, and we did not have a code provision that would allow us to regulate that. And so for that and for other reasons and other complaints that we've received in the past, we now bring this ordinance back to the council, and it was a request of a council member to bring this ordinance forward.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening, council. Before you have the request to amend City Ordinance Code, Chapter 26, which is the motor vehicle traffic, and it reflects only unlicensed vehicles. And we want to add a new parking ordinance for trailers on public streets. I asked you to keep two themes in mind as we talk about this, and first is managing space. And parking, as we know, is of a small commodity as the landscape of the city changes and the demands for parking go up, the complaints go up. This ordinance will allow for us to manage some of those parking spaces. And the other thing I asked you to think of is safety. And safety because these trailers do pose a safety element that it's hard for us to manage if we don't have an ordinance that allows for us to enforce. So the background of this is there were some complaints that were born out of trailers being parked in and around city streets, particularly residential streets. In the past year, the police department has received numerous complaints about trailers. And what's happening is owners of trailers were serpentining the residential streets and parking their trailer on the street, which was legal. They were properly tagged, trailers were in good condition, but they are trailers in front of someone's home that doesn't necessarily own them because they don't have a home where they can put them. With the density of apartments and condos, and people are going to still have property, and if they can park it on the street, they're going to. And so that's what was happening, and we had a number of trailers that were being parked on residential streets in front of people's homes, and we had no means of enforcing or moving them. So what we ended up having to do is finding out who owned them, going to the home, figuring out if they would move them on our request. Sometimes that would work, sometimes that wouldn't. What I would ask you to think about is, with the limited space of parking we have already, with people having additional trailers, boats, and recreational things, you can imagine that will limit parking. And also what happens is with trailers, because they don't have windows and they're tall and they're boxy, they also pose a line of sight issue. If you park them right by a driveway, small child playing or riding a bike on a driveway comes out, you can't see them. And so it poses a real traffic safety issue for our pedestrians, for our drivers, and obviously it's somewhat obnoxious to walk out there and always have someone else's trailer in your line of sight in front of your home. So that's what we're posing, as that we change the ordinance to allow for us to manage that. Investigating most of these complaints, what we'll find is consistently that these residential neighbors will park them where they know they can park them in residential streets. Looking throughout the city, we probably respond to close to 250 parking complaints a year. Of those ones that we go to, there's only about a dozen trailers on the residential streets on the daytime that are normally parked on our streets. So it's a small number of residential ones, but as I dare say, we grow in smaller units, maybe condos and apartments, we're going to see more of them. The one that was born out of this complaint was a person that lived in an apartment but stored their trailer on our residential streets away from where they lived because they weren't allowed to park it on the apartment's parking lot. I've seen it where we've had Fairfax County residents parking some of their boats and trailers on the city streets as well. So we would ask that in taking a look at the changing of the ordinance, we have struck the boats and trailers from section 26-9 and added a significant section in 12-23 and parking trailers and recreational vehicles on the city streets to be prohibited. Now, we have made some conditions in there for those people that may be coming into town and have a short visit. We have done some research with all of the local jurisdictions, well, not all of them, but of many jurisdictions to see what best fits the city's needs. Like I said, we don't have a large number of city trailers that are owned by residents, but we do have some. Most that are residential, that have space on their lots, park either their trailers or boats on their lots. But those that cannot will park them on the street. I would foresee that if we were to move forward with this ordinance, there would be press release, and then there would be a pocket of time where we could alert those residents that do have boats and trailers and recreational vehicles, and then give them a grace period of time to find either a place to park it or find other accommodations. So I'm standing here for questions if you have any or concerns.
Questions, Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Police Chief Gavin. I think the only question I have, and maybe it's a series of questions, has to do with the circumstance that gave rise to the request to have an ordinance with some teeth. This particular trailer in question was parked in front of someone's house, and I think there's another provision that says if you move the trailer every 3 days, you can start the clock running again on being able to park. So I presume this takes care of that provision. There's no 3-day statute. And of course, this agitated neighbor at 10 o'clock at night said, is there something that prevents him from moving 6 inches and starting the clock running again? And so I presume this does that.
Yes, it does. That was the problem, is that we had no provision to prohibit us from writing a ticket on that trailer. What we would do is we'd mark the tires, and if it posed, if it was there for a length of time, as the other ordinance would allow, if it was there for over, I believe 10 days, that we would then ticket it or have it towed. But this new ordinance would prohibit trailers altogether, with the exception of those trailers that would be used for recreational purposes. That one in particular was somebody that we did seek out, the owner. We talked to the owner. We talked to them about how they were serpentining the city streets. And in good faith, he was trying to move it in accordance to, the neighbors' wishes, but it ended up, like you said, if somebody went out of town, it would end up there for a week, or it would end up at some other place. But it was always in front of someone else's house. So yes, this will fix that.
All right, thank you for that. I'm glad to see that this is indeed the fine work of the city that can get stuff done. And I'm frankly quite amazed that between the time this was requested, it's come before us so quickly already, so it's all good. Are you the designee for, or is it Public Works or someone else that would be responsible for providing an extended permit if one's needed for this last provision here in line 152 to 154?
Typically, on a trailer complaint, we're motivated by the complaint, somebody calling it in. And oftentimes in parking complaints, that's what it is people will call in what they see as a perceived violation. If my parking enforcement officer, as you know, is very efficient, goes out and sees a trailer parked, he'll probably tire mark it and then time it. If it becomes or looks as if, somebody is visiting, we certainly have the ability and discretion to work with that homeowner, particularly if they have like out-of-town guests coming in with a small RV or whatever it may be. But it's those problematic ones that act, those landscape trailers, the box-type trailers that act as the real posed safety issue, because they're blinding to corners and driveways and line of sight. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Duncan and then Ms. Conley.
Just looking at the language here, there's additional language, right, elsewhere that speaks to abandoned or unlicensed vehicles, right? This doesn't touch that or even discuss it. There's separate.
That's what this ordinance actually is separating the two. As you see it, you have unlicensed vehicles, boats, and trailers. We wanted to separate them because the vehicle issue is different than the trailer issue. The vehicle issue is one where we had to find a way to just manage the trailers themselves. Because very well, there have been instances where we have people that have ownership in condominiums and then they park on city streets. I'm not talking about Northgate and East Jefferson at this point, but there are those instances in pockets within the city where people do park on city streets, and they should be allowed to park on city streets as city residents. The trailers and boats, we weren't able to regulate. And plus, some trailers, based on the type of trailer it is, don't necessarily have to have a state inspection. Whereas in a car, you have to have a state inspection, you have to have a city sticker, you have to have a license plate. So it allows us to look at all of those registrations and making sure everything is good and solid before we would ticket it.
Okay, thanks.
Ms. Conley?
My question is just about trailers that people are using to work during the day.
Yes.
What's the difference of the designation? Is it a trailer that's attached to something? Is that in this ordinance, or is it not?
Basically, if someone's working out of a trailer and they're able to move it, we would probably not, unless there was an absolute complaint and it was a traffic hazard and they refused to move it, would we ticket them or enforce that. We would work with whoever the contractor or independent or whoever it would be to have that moved to a place. Because like I said, we're talking about managing space and safety. So if it's a safety issue, we're going to have it moved immediately. But if it's managing space and it's daytime and normal residential parking would be maybe a little more fluid or more open, we would allow for them to be working, maybe landscapers or contractors. Does that answer your question?
Right, so for a home construction project where
Yes.
different trucks and trailers are pulling up different days,
Yes.
they would be allowed to park for more than 2 hours to do their job.
Oh, absolutely.
right?
But not more than overnight or
But they would have to come and go, so they couldn't leave all their stuff
yes.
for weeks on end while they're doing
Yes.
the project.
Yes.
Okay.
Because that's actually what the original complaint was born out of, not only the trailer that was serpentining the city streets, but also some construction equipment that was stagnant there for a period of time. Yeah.
Other questions? I have a few. I guess along those lines, let me ask, so as I read this language in the ordinance, you could park a trailer for no more than 6 hours. Is that correct, or am I mangling the recreational vehicle portion of this?
It says parking a trailer on a public street for more than 2 hours within a 24-hour period is prohibited. Now, if we want to clarify in terms of contractors, we could try to put more language in there, but I don't, if that's what you're getting at in terms of,
Yeah, to me, 2 hours just seems really restrictive to people who, and you may say, well, I'm not going to enforce it, but to me, a law ought to really just be what it ought to be,
Okay.
and not up to the discretion of people to enforce it in a way that is the intent of the
Sure.
legislative body. And so, to my mind, I think a longer period of time, like 8 hours or something like that, seems to be a more appropriate period of time if we want to allow people to pull a trailer in and unload their Bobcat and work all day. It seems to me that period of time, as long as it maybe says no overnight storage or something like that, would probably be more in keeping of what it sounds like or what I think people might desire. So that's one point, and I don't know if anyone agrees with that or has any thoughts on what I just described. I do have a couple more questions or comments. One, could you explain how the law relates to commercial vehicles that are not, for example, trailers? Let's say someone has a box truck associated with their activities during the day, they're a plumber or they work for a plumbing company. How that works when they drive their plumbing truck home that their apartment complex doesn't want to have within the complex. How does that fit in with our rules and regulations for parking commercial vehicles on street and other times?
I believe there's a separate provision on commercial vehicles that are used in businesses where they are prohibited from parking in residential areas.
Prohibited from parking for any length of time?
I believe that's correct. I'd want to go back and check it from the ordinance, but I did look at it today and see that there is a separate provision on commercial vehicles which are business related and have their business painted on the side and are
Okay.
used in a.
Chief Gavin, do you have any knowledge about that?
I don't get an abundance of complaints on that. I did not honestly read up on that ordinance right before I got here. So I can't give you specifics on that, but I don't get an abundance of complaints, and I don't honestly just don't see many out there outside of some portion of Annandale Road. We've had some that are above the commercial area there on Maple, but normally do not get complaints on it.
Okay. You had mentioned before of this, maybe a 3-day or a 10-day period. And looking at the current ordinance, I don't see any limitation that it has to continue for 3 days or 10 days, et cetera, with respect to what we're amending. In other words, there's a deletion. It shall be unlawful for any person to park any boat or trailer on any street in a residentially zoned district in the city. That seems pretty clear to me. It's just a question of enforcement, or whether someone wanted to enforce, a boat being there for an hour. I don't see any restriction. You have to wait 10 days or mark the tires and all that.
You're right.
Is that just how you guys have interpreted it or wanted to administer it?
Right. The idea being that we cannot have, it would be ideal not to have trailers and or boats parked as a practice on the city streets by our city residents. As far as the vehicles are concerned, the vehicles, it's usually, the vehicles are there are a couple issues with vehicles. Vehicles have licenses, vehicles have city stickers, and vehicles have state tags. So what it allows for, there's a time period with those in terms of timing to see how long they've been there, because oftentimes people have visitors, people go on vacation. We've had and seen complaints that people have gotten tickets for an abandoned vehicle maybe when they should not have. So what that 10-day grace period allows for is some period for those type of things that do happen, maybe visitors or residents going out of town. For the boats and trailers, it's not only managing space, but it's safety. There's a safety issue that I think is more important in terms of blinding line of sight and things like that. When you have the vehicles, when we look at a vehicle that's on the city streets that is improperly tagged, it's easy to write them a ticket for a tag. But if they're properly tagged and their inspection and they're just laying there, sometimes the investigation leads to there's another reason, or maybe even a crime that has occurred why the vehicle's sitting there. And only through parking do we find that out. So we are trying to manage space, and we are also trying to affect safety with this trailer ordinance.
I guess what I'm trying to say or suggest is that maybe you currently have the ability to do a lot of this. It seems, I'm not trying to make this more difficult, but you got a whole lot of text on this one page of new text, where it almost seems like you could keep your existing text. It says it shall be unlawful for any person to park any boat, trailer, add semi-trailer or RV, except for trailers less than 8 hours, and then just enforce it as written, instead of, going through the machinations of waiting 10 days or 3 days. And I'm not trying to make this more difficult, but that just occurs to me, and with this whole page of text and overnight people, and, it just seems like there's a lot of stuff here.
It is.
And so I know this came, I guess, pretty much from Alexandria, pretty straight up from Alexandria. But it seems like maybe more than necessary. And again, I don't want to make this more difficult than it needs to be, but that just occurred to me in reading this and reading the deletions, that it might be simpler just to add a few words to what's already there. But are there other comments or any, Mr. Z?
Yes, I think it's not stated here, but I think in the other section, even though on surface lines 58 and 62 seem to have the full impact and import that we're looking for, I believe there's no requirement for a trailer to be registered, licensed in the city, so,
There is.
and if that's true, then this is optional whether they choose to register it here or not.
Well, one thing I would just note, we went through the same thought process that you did because we typically like to have as few words in a new ordinance as possible. And the reason we didn't just change the text of B is that that whole section is saying trailers do need to be licensed. In fact, you do go to Tom Clinton's office and you get a sticker for your trailer. And you're allowed, under this ordinance, you're allowed to get your trailer, get a sticker on it, and put it on the street unless it happens to be a boat trailer. Boat trailers are the only things that are addressed here. So what we were trying to prevent is that situation where people can just kind of abandon a licensed trailer on the street for an indefinite period of time. And so that's, when we looked around, we found Alexandria had the one that essentially does that, and it applies to RVs as well. So the main thing we're trying to prevent is the fact that these are big vehicles and they can be left on the street for an indefinite period of time under the existing code. So this would change that for RVs and for trailers. Now, if you're working on them, you have 6 hours is essentially what you have if you're unpacking your RV or working on unpacking the trailer as well. I think the question that's come up tonight is, what about contractors? And that is not explicitly addressed here. And so I think the answer is, in terms of the intent, is that the contractor's working in and out of that trailer, and so they wouldn't get a ticket. But that might be something that we need to be clearer on, because that's not explicitly addressed. A contractor or a home builder or somebody like that who's doing work in the city.
Are there other comments?
Just wanted to follow up on his mention of the vehicles that have a business painted on the side. I have a recollection, the more you talked about it, about a citizen complaint down Southwest Street with fairly frequent parking of some sort of plumbing services truck or trucks in front of a residence. And I'm not sure if it's still going on, but I do remember that being brought to our attention, and that's another instance that maybe we might look into. And I don't know what you do in that situation if the person who lives in the house, is given the truck to drive home at night. It's sort of like a police officer driving a police car to their home, but that's something that we should look into to make sure it's not, a company which is using our streets to park a fleet of their plumbing trucks because they don't have room or they don't care to park them at their business site.
I've noted that, and I'll look into that.
I think we can also look at this separate provision, which is 2614. I just have a couple notes, is the one about commercial vehicles, which is the ones that have signs identifying a business or something on them. And there is a separate prohibition on that, but we'll get back to you on the specifics of that.
I tell you, looking at B again, I'm not sure. A talks about the registered vehicles, but B doesn't. It's just a flat-out simple statement. It's unlawful to do X, Y, and Z. I mean, I think, in at least my read on this, you could actually put in the RVs and the trailers in B and create an exception and kind of be done with it. But it's hard to look at this, and I know you've put much more time in it than I have, in review and the drafting, et cetera. Is there a desire? I tell you, I also have a bit of a concern. The public, this has probably fallen under the radar screens for members of the public. And I want to make sure that the public's informed that we are considering taking this action to the extent people have RVs or whatever. I think it's important that we publicize through the city to the extent that we can that we're considering this action. Does anyone else have any concerns? Is there a motion? Would anyone like to make a motion for this? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. I move to approve first reading for TO 14-31 and schedule a public hearing and second reading on November 24th, 2014.
Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay. Any additional comment? Ms. Conley?
Line 152 at the very end addresses contractors conducting street work. the parking restrictions on this section may be waived by a written permit by the city manager or his designee for a contractor conducting street work for the city. Oh, for the city.
That's the
Oh,
key.
Just the city.
That's just the city, forget it.
So it's a fairly narrow exception.
Can I ask a question before we take a vote to the city attorney? If we were to make changes such as going from 2 hours to 8 hours or something like that, would this need to come back for first reading? Or would this be able to be, would that change not be considered to rise the threshold of requiring an additional first reading?
It's hard to say without knowing exactly the change, but I think if we were just going to change sort of the number of hours in a particular place, it probably wouldn't be a problem. It may be, though, that if we're going to consider sort of wholesale rewriting it to a simpler version, we would need to redo first reading.
Okay. All right, Madam Clerk, do you want to call the roll call vote?
Ms. Conley,
Yes.
Mr. Duncan,
Yes.
Ms. Oliver,
Yes.
Mr. Snyder,
Yes.
Mr. Z,
Yes.
Mayor Tarter.
Yes.
And the motion passes 6-0.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, will you call the next item?
It looks like we have consent items for appointments.
At the bond resolution, actually, is that, let me just see where that is.
That's under
It's a
other-
non-action
C.
other
item.
business. Yep.
Okay. All right, so our next item would be the consent appointments or consent agenda. Is there anything, Mr. Shields, to say about that?
No, perhaps the appointments committee members might on the appointments.
Mr. Z? Ms. Oliver, Ms. Conley? Anyone?
Do you want to do it? Thank you, Mayor. I move the appointment of the recommended slate of candidates. These include reappointment of Lori LaFave, reappointment of Catherine Chandler, reappointment of Joseph P. Douglas Sr., reappointment of Eric Pelton, and new appointment of Terry Zawacki.
Okay. Is there any discussion? No?
Could I just ask one question about Mr. Douglas? I couldn't quite tell from reading the letter, what is the name of his towing concern?
Pete's Towing.
That's Pete's Towing. Okay. All right, thanks.
Do we have a second for the motion?
I'll second.
Okay. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll call vote?
Yes.
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 Yes. Okay, and then the other business?
On other business, we have discussion of TR 1437, resolution of the City Council of the City of Falls Church, Virginia, authorizing the issuance and sale of general obligation public improvement bonds, and this is a work session style discussion.
Okay, Mr. Shields?
Thank you, Mayor Tarter, members of council. This resolution has been reviewed one time in work session just about 2 weeks ago, and since then the voters have approved the referendum, and so we are prepared with the council's approval of this bond resolution to go forward and go to market with 3 different items that would be in the bond resolution. One is authorization for $10.4 million in debt for the Mount Daniel expansion, $640,000 of debt for our sanitary sewer related to the Fairfax County treatment plant upgrades, and $700,000 for stormwater projects in the city. Mr. LeCondre can provide a summary of the item, but we wanted to just have a chance to have a discussion about the way it's structured, and see if there are any questions or comments on that, and then this would come back on November 24th for the council's action. It's a resolution, so it would not have 2 readings. It would just be one action by the city council.
Thank you. Mr. LeCondre, welcome.
Happy Monday, Council.
Same to you.
Before you, you have a bond resolution We are in the process of right-sizing it, because if you'll notice, I direct your attention to line 20. If you add up line 20, it's slightly less than 12 million. Our bond counsel had advised us previously, when we had additional items in here, that the maximum amount would be 12,625,000. That number is going to come down, so your max number will be 12,360,000. All right, that's on line 7. Again, this is also a reaffirming of the council option to use developer proffers for part of the Mount Daniel project. Make sure we're all on board with that and clear.
Mr. Mayor, if I might ask the obvious question, what if the proffers don't materialize?
If the proffers don't materialize, we will exercise one of 2 options. I believe the project is scheduled to be finished spring of calendar year 16.
Well, the Mount Daniel project is scheduled to be finished in the fall of 2016.
Okay.
And the developer proffers are expected to be paid to the city in the spring of 2016.
Right.
So if that is delayed, then we'll talk about what we will do.
Right. In the event of that, we will do one of 2 things. We will come back to council with a bond reimbursement resolution so that we can borrow an additional $4 million when we do our next round of financing, or we can do a bond resolution for the $4 million at that time.
And just to clarify, the proffers are for projects that are either completed or are being built right now.
That's correct.
That's important.
Okay, continue, please.
All right. In the bond resolution itself, I would direct your attention to line 286. It's a continuing disclosure section. And what it does is it authorizes the city manager or the finance director to enter into a continuing disclosure agreement. In your offering statement, there is a section for disclosures, financial disclosures. Recently, the SEC had announced a municipalities continuing disclosure cooperation initiative, which requires the municipalities and the underwriters to disclose any instances of noncompliance. This will allow us to complete the form that the SEC is going to require underwriters and issuers to fill out.
Is that it? Thank you. Okay, how about questions, comments? Mr. Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, questions really relate to the financial and CIP context of this particular project. We currently have in the CIP now, the voters approved Mount Daniel, right? And that's a total of how much?
15.6 million.
15.6 million, and we're going to bond roughly 12 million, and then the remainder would be from proffers, right?
That's correct.
Roughly.
11.4
Okay.
million. That's right.
So also in the CIP, we have the city hall, right? And what's the total amount of that over what period of time that's currently being planned?
Well, the City Hall project has already had approximately $4.5 million of debt issued for it. Those were for some of the critical renovations, the evidence room, and the things that we had identified through the capital project. So there would be an additional $7 million that the council would have as a separate action before you for consideration once the architecture is complete and you understand what it is exactly that we're trying to accomplish with that
And
project.
when would we likely go to the bond market for that additional $7 million?
I believe 2016 or possibly 2017.
Okay. All right. And then with regard to the library, the Village Preservation and Improvement Society had a program yesterday where they talked about open space and they talked about the library. And my understanding is that there's $8 million proposed for the library work itself, right? And then there's an additional amount that would be necessary to do the parking garage next door. No number was provided that yesterday. So how much would, first of all, is the 8 million right? And then secondly, what do we have in the CIP or will we propose for the parking garage next door?
The 8 million is what's already in the adopted CIP, and so that's their planning number. The garage, we have initially estimated to be 1.5 million or in that range in addition to that. And in our discussions with the library board, they have wanted to make it very clear that that parking garage is not coming out of the 8 million in terms of their planning number. But at any rate, the parking garage has been characterized as an add-on to that project,
Right.
to that number, to that $8 million number.
And by the way, a question I had is what would be the cost of, in essence, acquiring that space as an alternative in a development project such as Mason Row?
Right. We have been asking the developer for that number, and we have not yet gotten it, but.
Okay, can we stay on that?
We will.
Because with some additional time, if that's an attractive alternative, all things considered, we may want to think about that. Again, a lot of public discussion and council discussion. So if I add, I don't even want to try the add, 26.5, 9.5, 10, roughly 37 million then in projects over the next few years.
That's right.
We'll be bonding some significant portion of that. Now, the next question I have for you, Mr. LeCondre, is when you add all that up, how does that fit into prudent fiscal management in terms of how much long-term debt we can take on based upon standards which you recommend?
Well, at this point, what is to be added to the CIP, again, the City Hall is not part of it at this point in time, neither is the additional money for the library. But based on the projections that we've done on the current CIP, there is room for those projects. Your major issue is if you do anything larger.
So we feel that under the applicable financial standards that we could do Mount Daniel, the library, and the City Hall as we've just summarized them, and the debt we would take on, a significant part of that,
It is within our city
that
policies.
would be consistent with city policy and prudential policies that you would recommend.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. Those were some initial questions. Thank you.
Are there other questions or comments from anyone? Mr. Z and then Mr. Duncan.
Thank you, Mayor. The previous documents that were shown to us as part of this discussion with regard to line 68, the summary on fiscal impact, purported that we could do this with the amount being funded equal to 0.5% on the tax rate increase. I'm happy to go back and look for that document. I didn't bring that tonight. I'm sure you have that somewhere. As a matter of fact, the city manager brought it with him, and So correct me if I'm wrong, but half a cent on the tax rate is about 180, 190, something like that, so.
180.
And so the debt service is 880,000 in line 68. Is that some term of art I'm not understanding, or is that what we're asking the citizens to pay in 2016?
In the discussions about the financing of the project, we provided a discussion paper that had a series of cases to illustrate what the project would cost. And those cases ranged from just a straight debt financing for the whole project, which would cost about $1.1 million, or a little over 3 cents on the tax rate. And then we considered some other cases where we used the developer proffers, and from the council discussion, I think there was agreement to do that, which is why this resolution is cast the way it is. And then additional cases were provided, and one of those was to show the return on investment from the investment in the pension fund. And so if you take that out over the long term for the project, then that's how you get to the half-cent impact. And so those are the cases that were discussed. I don't think that decision is not immediately before the council. That's going to have to be with all the other budget numbers that come before council, starting at your retreat on December 2nd, if that's the date that we agree on for that retreat, and into the spring.
So then, for the record then, and for the public that's watching this, and those that have access to this document, that on page 3, in line 68, where you talk about the estimated debt service, approximately for both the Mount Daniel School and the sanitary sewer and stormwater comes to approximately $890K, which is nearly 3 cents, 2.75 cents on the tax rate. And subtracting off that would be the potential savings from our investment in the pension fund with the water fund proceeds, and that would result in a need to not pay of approximately $634,000, if my memory still serves me. Okay. So getting back to Councilmember Snyder's question, and I'm just reading off this sheet, which I don't expect you to see, but you'll probably recall this from that which the city manager sent us on the 4th of November, and thank you for that, by the way. I think it goes a long way to explaining many of the things. Of course, no good deed going unpunished here. I have yet another whole host of questions now based on this sheet, which I intend to ask you about, not tonight. But the simple question is, currently we're carrying nearly $5 million in annual debt service, which, if my calculations are correct, is roughly 14.35 cents on our current tax rate, more or less, right? And so we would add another 3 cents more to that, roughly. So, I mean, off this one set of books, we're now talking about 17 cents on tax rate we're asking the taxpayers to carry going forward. More or less. Is that true?
If your addition is correct, yes.
All right. Well, if you'll make yourself available this week, I'll be asking you a variety of questions. Thank you very much.
Mr. Duncan, did you have a question?
Just wanted to ask, will we know the exact parameters of the bond before we have our budget guidance meeting? That the bonds are not going to be committed until sometime in December, is that right? So we'll still be dealing a bit with not completely known numbers at that point, but we will know before the end of the year, right?
Yes, we will.
So before you...
Yeah, under the schedule now, we would go to market or we'd close, and
First week in December.
I think it's a little later than that with the revised schedule.
Okay,
So like,
anyway.
Closer to the holidays,
Right,
December 20th.
okay. The only other thing I want to say is thanks to the Vice Mayor and Mr. Zeeb for pursuing the subject of, the other CIP projects, large projects that are out there, because there is considerable interest in the community, and I guess it's fair to say a bit of, I don't want to say disbelief, but skepticism that we are going to be able to undertake all of these. I think it stems from the fact that for several years we were not in a position, because of the economy and recovery and so forth, to walk and chew gum and do several things at once. But the way this is mapped out, we would be working on all of these projects: Mount Daniel, City Hall, Library, in some fashion, not necessarily the numbers that we have heard tonight, but in some fashion over the next several years, and our plans do contemplate that. The chart that Mr. LeCondre shared with me earlier, which we're going to work to update before the budget guidance meeting, shows that our policy is 12% for allowed debt, and these projects as they're currently mapped out don't exceed 8 or 9% until very late in the decade, when the high school comes online in some form, and that's a different discussion, and we won't go into that tonight at all. I just think it's important for the public, and they are paying attention now, I think, to keep a close eye on all this. And the attendance at the meeting yesterday to discuss the library and the open space was very good, and there were a lot of good questions, and I think that's healthy.
Thank you. Are there any other members of council who have any comments, questions? Okay, I would ask for any public comment, but there's no public here, so, okay, well, this is just for information purposes tonight, Mr. Shields, correct? We're not taking any action, or is there any action proposed for this evening?
There isn't, but in terms of making sure that the whole team, because we do have bond counsel, we've got other pieces to this that all need to move together, and then plan to go to market after that. It would be good to have council consensus that that the bond size is what you want, the 10.4 million, which relies on the developer proffers. That was discussed at work session. That's what we took away from work session as council guidance, but we just want an affirmation of that. That's kind of the key thing that could change in the bond documents. I would note also that we've advertised it at this level, so if there's a change to that, we would need to know that as soon as possible.
Mr. Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to make sure that the school community is aware of this, because these proffers were, as I understand it, for educational purposes, right?
That's
So
correct.
they need to know that we're using it for this purpose, and therefore those proffers will not be available for other purposes.
I know they're aware of it. I don't think the school board has officially acted on it to give you a recommendation, but I do know that they know that that is what we're planning to do.
Thank you.
Okay, are there any other, is there anyone who disagrees with the proposal that's been suggested? I know we're not voting on it, but as far as guidance goes, doesn't look like you're hearing much, if any, Mr. Shields. So why don't we go ahead and move on to other matters? Is there any business or other business not on the agenda tonight? Anyone? Mr. Snyder?
Mr. Mayor, very quickly, a couple things. We normally put together our legislative program around this time of year. In fact, it's the clock is ticking. A couple things I'm wondering if shouldn't be on it. First of all, there's a lot of concern in the transportation world about what they call the fiscal cliff, which means that the bonds dry up, that there's been a shifting from capital to operating in the state budget. Anyway, I think the council needs to be briefed on that issue, and then we ought to decide whether we want something in our legislative package to begin to deal with that, because that's a looming issue. Also related to transportation funding, I have a concern that, again, the budget situation will result in Northern Virginia, again, taxing itself just to have prior streams of revenue eroded, with a net effect, meaning that we're not getting the kind of added benefit that taxpayers were told they'd be getting. So I'd like just a little bit of a briefing for the council and focus on that. The third issue I'm interested in is having some legislation on DMV Select, allowing the kind of flexibility that our elected officials believe that work in the treasurer's and revenue office need in order to make that program work, as well as the appropriate funding, not necessarily from local sources. So those are a couple things I'm interested in the legislative program. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other comments, council requests?
Just one. The meeting of the City Hall Public Safety Renovations Task Force is scheduled still for this Thursday?
It is, and Ms. Mester will be there.
That's what I was asking. Okay, well, that's terrific. Okay, I just want everybody to be reminded that I'm your liaison to that group and have attended the first meeting, and if there are comments or thoughts that you would like me to carry into the Thursday meeting, I encourage you to go on to the city website and look for City Hall Public Safety Renovations as your key search word, and there's, a multi-page thing there that takes you through as much detail as you care to go into about what the task force is discussing.
Thank you. Are there any other council member comments?
I just wanted to check on the budget process. I wanted to be clear that we do not lose sight of our budget guidance. I recall last year that was done in November, December, and with no meetings in December, that needs to come forward into November.
Well, typically we go to this joint meeting with the school board and the city council, and we've had some challenges scheduling that, so that's later than normal. And from that, then the council, after having seen some of the numbers and had a discussion in public about them with the school board, and then guidance happens after that. So that would actually, put it in January if we keep with that way of typically doing it. So I think that's what we will need to plan to do.
Is it possible that we could, at our next work session, have a preliminary discussion about the framework for that? Or at least get agreement on the key items that we want to be clear to you on, so that it's not everything but the kitchen sink, but that we're focused on what our key issues are?
Does that work, Mr. Shields?
We certainly could do that.
Let's see, today is it's next week.
That's right, next Monday.
Okay. Are there any other council member comments? Mr. Z?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm just, thank you, Councilmember Oliver, for bringing this up, but there have been those that have been asking for this general fund support long-term obligations, the things that we bond. I have tried to be true to those that ask for it and send it out to them. While this may be embedded in our annual report, there's nothing like holding up one sheet of paper here, so that if there are those out watching tonight that wish to have their very own copy to it of this document, I'm happy to send it to them. You can contact the city manager as well. He'll provide that, but our emails are available on the website. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Snyder?
Yeah, very quickly, Mr. Mayor, some of us attended the most recent meeting on the site where the George Mason High School is. I think there was a very excellent PowerPoint put together summarizing the ULI work, and is that available now on the website?
It is. It's available. The website is at the city website / George Mason High School Steering Committee, and that's where that information is found. So if you're looking for it under the tab for government, go to Task Force, and that steering committee is one of those listed, and then all the information that the steering committee has been looking at is posted there.
Okay. Also note that the League of Women Voters has a visioning session on next Sunday, November 16, that will involve that and perhaps other visioning issues to give the community a sense to begin weighing in on this. Thanks.
And that's at 2:30 in the community center, is it not? Mr. Z?
I'm just wondering, Councilmember Snyder, that maybe the question you're trying to get to is that the ULI technical assistance panel information was very well put together, and I got a lot out of it, but perhaps putting it just solely accessible from a school-oriented steering committee page may not be sufficient. Maybe we would want to link somewhere else, such as the boundary land adjustment page as well, so that you can get to it, the study from different places. I must confess I had to look very hard for it myself. It doesn't pop up in the internal search engine.
Okay, are there any other comments? To my recollection, there were no meeting minutes to approve tonight. Unless there's anything else to discuss tonight, why don't we see if we can get a motion to adjourn?
Move we adjourn.
Is there a second? Second. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you.